We it's not bad.
No, I just saw the label and I was like, this is a perfect idea.
We'll be detailing. Yeah, okay. Ready? Claus von Stauffenberg was a decorated soldier in World War II for the German army. He grew increasingly disillusioned with the Nazi regime, ultimately spearheading Operation Valkyrie, a plan to assassinate Hitler. His sister-in-law, Melitta, was one of the most valuable test pilots in the Luftwaffe. Ultimately, the fallout from Operation Valkyrie affected both of them and resulted in several executions and a daring daytime escape attempt from a concentration camp. And obviously, the attempts on Hitler's life failed, but Hitler, wasn't all that bad. He killed Hitler. We'll be detailing the lives of both Claus and Melitta von Stauffenberg and the consequences of their actions on this week's episode of Misfit History. I almost laughed again because I saw your face while I was going through that, and I was like, all right, cool. Go ahead. Oh, hi. What's up? Well, welcome to another episode of Misfit History. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host,
Hannah.
And our special guest,
the one and only Lil Lucy. AKA Lucio.
And today we're doing a very exciting episode about two people from Nazi Germany who were, one was part of the resistance movement and the other was more of a personal resistance, but they were both from the same family.
Brothers and sisters?
Actually, brother and sister-in-law.
Oh.
So we're going to be discussing the von Stauffenberg family, namely Claus von Stauffenberg, the military leader who was involved in the resistance movement against Adolf Hitler, and Melitta von Stauffenberg, who married Klaus's older brother and was a test pilot for the Nazis. So that's who's pictured on the screen. The one with the eye patch is Claus. The other one is Melitta, who's in the plane.
Wait, they were family but went on different sides? Is that what you just said?
No. They were both, well, it's actually kind of complicated. Okay. Melitta she wasn't part of the resistance movement, but she didn't support the Nazi regime.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we'll get into, they were both ultimately pro-Germany more than anything.
Yeah.
So to start with some historical context, Germany had just lost World War I, and they were in complete economic collapse. They had just had, throughout the entirety of the war, oh my gosh, I'm already having my slides act up. Throughout the entirety of the war, awesome, there we go. Throughout the entirety of the war, a lot of hyperinflation, devastating war debt, reparations that needed to be paid to other countries that had won the war, who Germany had attacked, and the German mark essentially became worthless. It became 4.2 trillion German marks, was equivalent to $1, which is way worse than any modern inflation.
I don't know. Pretty close. Sorry, never mind. Sorry. We're gonna cut that out.
Oh man.
And we're back after a brief ad.
Yeah. Sponsored by inflation. So yeah, in 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II had to abdicate leadership of Germany. The German Revolution was led to the proclamation of a republic, with the Social Democratic Party taking power under Friedrich Ebert. The government was plagued by weakness, constantly battling threats from left-wing communists and right-wing militarists. The entirety of the start of post-World War I Germany was marked by political violence. Many Germans, particularly the wealthier Germans and the Germans in the rural population, were terrified that the communist revolution that had just happened in Russia was about to come to Germany, especially because of the growing unrest for day-to-day laborers, because by the end of a shift, they would be making substantially less money than they were originally promised because inflation was happening so quickly. Also, the military became and really remained a symbol of German identity and strength, and returning soldiers were welcomed with flowers and praise, as many believed that the army of Germany had not really lost, but was more stabbed in the back by politicians. This was similar to like how with Vietnam, a lot of people in the US felt that the war wasn't actually lost, but politicians just didn't let them fight it. That's how Germany thought about their soldiers, but they were much more prideful in World War I than the US was in Vietnam. The German army under the Treaty of Versailles was limited to only 100,000 men, which is tiny compared to what it had been pre-war and what it rapidly became leading up to World War II. But that meant that it became very politically one-sided because it was so small and insular. It was not representative of all of Germany, but it became a massively conservative right-wing institution, which has helped usher in the start of Nazism. And its generals were viewed as like protectors of the nation more than the weak politicians who filled the power void after Kaiser Wilhelm II voided power. And just in general, only having 100,000 soldiers made that that German people felt that their country had been humiliated on the public stage. They were one of the most powerful countries prior to World War I, but now were limited economically and militarily, which led to a lot of the social unrest we saw. So the map I have here is, which you can see in the video feed for the podcast, available on YouTube and Spotify, I believe, is of the Weimar Republic, which was Germany's first democratic government. It was established immediately after World War I and named for the city where its constitution was drafted. It was characterized by political instability, hyperinflation, vibrant culture, and economic hardship that ultimately paved the way for Adolf Hitler to rise to power. It was a 12-year period from 1919 to 1933 that it transitioned from the imperial rule under Kaiser Wilhelm II to a republic with proportional representation system. But it struggled with the war guilt, the treaty burdens, and a lot of extremism, both communist and later fascist, leading to its collapse and the establishment of a dictatorship. So during the early part of those years, it was defined by constant political violence, the Spartacist uprising in 1919, and the Kapp Putsch in 1920. And to many Germans, the democracy that they had welcomed felt like it was the same as just parliamentary paralysis and endless fights in the street. Like essentially that their democracy was weak and the politicians were inept and couldn't handle everything that was going on.
No bueno.
Yes, very no bueno. And again, just in the midst of all the rising inflation, Germany had to pay reparations as dictated by the Treaty of Versailles, and the reparations had to be paid in gold, which would maintain its value. Yeah, because Germany was printing so much, they weren't allowed to use their own currency to pay the reparations. So each time they sent out gold, their money, which was already being heavily inflated, became even more inflated because they had less gold backing it. And in 1922, they requested permission to suspend their payments while their economy had to recover. The Allies refused to allow them to do this. And in 1923, it was a breaking point for their financial situation, and they literally just couldn't pay. So they asked permission to not pay. That was refused, and then they just didn't have money to pay. There's just nothing left to scrape out of the barrel. And on the 9th of January in 1923, in response to missing out on their payments, which is a very quick turnaround because it's only 9 days into 2023, or into 1923, that France and Belgium invaded a region of Germany which contained a lot of factories just to take the resources to make up for the unpaid payments, which made it even worse for their already dire financial situation. The German government supported the workers to go on strike, which the workers did because they didn't want to cooperate with France and Belgium. And the French sent in their own workers to work the factories, arrested the leaders of the German strikers, arrested the German police, and caused even more political and civil unrest in the area. Now that France and Belgium were occupying that region of Germany, goods became even more difficult to obtain, became more expensive, and the government had to print more money. So by 1923, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Workers paid by the hour found that wages were worthless because prices had risen since they began their shifts. The situation just became worse and worse. A new system was intended to reduce political conflicts. That's why this was all implemented. They didn't want a repeat of World War I, but it resulted in many different parties gaining a small amount of seats in the Reichstag, or the German leadership. No one party had a majority, so parties had to join together to rule in coalitions. And each party in these coalitions had very different aims that led to disagreements on policy. These disagreements made it difficult for the Reichstag to govern, leading to the perception, even more so as time went on, that their leaders were ineffectual. And the more time they had, instead of resolving these issues, it became worse because they became more fractured. In addition to the difficulty, the unpopular reparations payments, which the Treaty of Versailles required Germany to pay, put a huge amount of economic pressure on the government. These tough economic and political circumstances made people susceptible to extreme political views. And enter our first character, the von Stauffenberg family. So we have in the picture on the left, Klaus with his two older brothers, who were twins, Berthold and Alexander. And in the picture on the right, their father, Alfred. Then next to him is Berthold, then Klaus, and then seated Alexander.
I really thought that one was a girl.
Yeah, that's not a girl.
Nope.
I was just about to
goodness.
ask. That's not a girl?
No. So they were a very aristocratic family. I'll explain some of their aristocratic history here. So Klaus Philipp Maria Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg was, and by the way, I'm going to miss some names in this. These are some tough names. Was born on November 15th, 1907, in his family's castle in Jettington, Bavaria. He was the youngest of three brothers, though he did have a twin who died just one day after birth, leaving Klaus to grow up alongside his older twin brothers, Berthold and Alexander. His father served as the last Oberhofmarschall of the Kingdom of Württemberg, and his mother was a granddaughter of a famous Prussian general who helped to defeat Napoleon. So the family was connected to power in Prussia, Bavaria. Württemberg was one of the many, many kingdoms that made up divided Germany, and his father assisted Kaiser Wilhelm II during the course of the First World War. In 1918, the family moved their estate to Lottlingen, where Klaus and his brother spent their youth exploring the Alps. Despite his eventual military fame, Klaus was a scholarly and artistic child. He attended the historic Eberhard Ludwig Gymnasium in Stuttgart, although he frequently missed school due to chronic bronchitis and tonsillitis. He was physically delicate as a boy, but he had an enormous mental resolve, eventually becoming an elite horse rider, or equestrian, who was a candidate for the 1936 German Olympic team. In addition to his athletic interests, he was a skilled cellist, which is why I was playing cello music earlier. And at one point, he seriously considered a career as either a musician or even an architect. And at 11, age 11, he drafted detailed plans to rebuild his family's castle. All three Stauffenberg brothers were heavily influenced by their Catholic faith and aristocratic heritage, but the heaviest influence on them in their lives was the mystic poet Stephan George, who is a very interesting figure in German history. He was I'll get into more about him in a second, but just know that Stephan George had an inner circle called Secret Germany in the 1920s, and Klaus became a devoted disciple of Stephan. His ideology rejected materialism of the Weimar Republic in favor of a new Reich, a spiritual and cultural aristocracy led by an elite. These ideals kind of provided moral framework for resistance against the Nazi regime, which he being Klaus, saw as like a vulgar perversion of the German spirit. And so this here is Stefan George. He was known for his role largely as the leader of a highly influential literary circle called the George Kreis, or George's Circle, and for founding the literary magazine Journal for the Arts. The outcome of World War I was a realization of Stefan George's worst fears. In the 1920s, George hated how German culture had developed, particularly its bourgeois mentality, a lot of the archaic rituals that they followed, and he wanted to create new noble German culture guided by mental discipline, relationships with others, while Germany was in a period of social, political, spiritual, and artistic decay. So his ideal would be mental discipline and relationships with others. George's poetry was discovered, and he slowly had his concepts of a thousand years of like new Germany and fire of the blood, like true German blood prevailing to make you stronger, was co-opted by Nazism. Now, George detested these racial theories, especially Nordic Superman concepts that the Nazis had, but his writing was so on the line, as it was, that it became very easy for the Nazis to co-opt a lot of his theories about, you know, cultural heritage and nobility of like purpose and political pride into the exclusion of people who weren't from your cultural group. And that was kind of led to a lot of, I guess, the ability of the Nazis to try to play off of what he said. But
Are you talking about how they only wanted blue eyes, blondes?
yeah, so that's what the Nordic Superman was a theory that the Nazis had, that like the Aryan blood, the blue eyes, blonde hair is the ideal person. And through selective inbreeding and force
inbreeding?
Yeah, as in like so they had something where you couldn't mix blood, which actually comes up later for our other character, Melitta, because she was Jewish. They didn't want anyone who was outside of the Aryan race to mingle with other to mingle with non-Aryans. Or they didn't want anyone who was Aryan to mingle with non-Aryan.
Yeah.
But according to some, George had a low opinion of Hitler, in whom he saw none of the greatness of Caesar or Napoleon. And shortly before Hitler became chancellor, on January 30th, 1933, the poet said that if National Socialists came to power, everyone in Germany would have to wear a noose around his neck, and those who refused would be hanged immediately. So another thing that George was famous for was he brought the swastika, which they called a hooked cross, to German culture. He didn't mean it for the purpose that it was ultimately used for, but again, it was another thing that was co-opted by the Nazi Party. Because he was so influential, the Nazis offered a lot of money to try to help George publicly take face as the forefather of the Nazis and their national revolution. And if he was agreeable to the proposal, either President Paul von Hindenburg or Chancellor Adolf Hitler would write the official letter. And George declined both the money and the honorary position because he explained that he had administered German literature for 5 decades without any need for an academy. He did not deny his ancestorship of the new national movement and did not preclude his intellectual cooperation. There were those within the Nazi Party who were enraged by his negative response, who suspected the sincerity of his claims of sympathy for a national revolution and even denounced him by calling him a Jew. Ultimately, moving on toward his death after his exile from the Nazi government, he traveled to Wasserburg on Lake Constance, where he remained for 4 weeks. He was joined there at various times by Frank Minhart, Berthold von Stauffenberg, Claus von Stauffenberg, and other members of his circle. And after his death, Claus von Stauffenberg arranged for his burial. So Stefan George was a very heavy influence on many people in Germany who later became members of the resistance, and especially Claus and Berthold von Stauffenberg. So Claus von Stauffenberg's national pride was rooted in his like aristocratic upbringing and also everything he learned from Stefan George and Stefan George's circle. The philosophy they had hated the idea of like mass movements the way that the Nazi party worked. It more wanted to be a new Reich in terms of like a moral and spiritual development of the country and return to like national pride without moving into the atrocities that the Nazis did to try to take over the world, I guess is a way to think about it. And in 1926, surprising many people who knew how much Claus liked poetry and art and literary studies, Claus chose to follow his family tradition and enlisted in the 17th Cavalry Division, in large part, as I said, because of his upbringing of national pride. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in only 1930, which was 4 years after joining, finishing his training as best in his cavalry group. While with his cavalry group at Dresden, he was noted for being highly social with peers, but frequently at odds with superiors due to a healthy contempt for protocol. He was known as a brilliant tactical mind and was considered one of the brightest shining stars in the German military. On his 23rd birthday in 1930, he became engaged to Nina Frein von Lerchenfeld, who is pictured next to him here, and he married her in 1933. On his wedding day, he famously remarked to her, "To wed is to be on duty." And he wore his uniform to the wedding. Now, opposed to his upbringing, born in 1903 in Prussia, Melitta Schiller's early life was defined by a struggle for acceptance across ethnic and gender lines. After World War I, her family was forced to relocate when her hometown became part of newly formed Poland, an environment which was not hospitable to ethnic Germans. Despite that, she emerged as a brilliant student with a fixation on aerodynamics and physics. However, her entry into aviation was met with significant resistance. She first attempted to join a gliding school in 1920 and later a flying club in Munich in 1923, but she was rejected because women were officially barred from such training. She only gained access after providing her technical worth, spending months hauling heavy gliders up slopes and repairing damaged aircraft until she was allowed to fly. Her academic journey was isolated. She was one of only a few women who could study engineering at the Technical University of Munich. She graduated cum laude in 1927, specializing in flight mechanics. The most severe challenge of her career arose in 1936. Despite her father's early conversion to Protestantism, the Nazi regime had racial laws that identified her paternal grandfather as Jewish. This classification as a mixed race led to her immediate dismissal from her civil service position at the German Aeronautical Research Institute. To survive and protect her family from the Nuremberg laws, she was forced to make herself indispensable to the military. By performing thousands of perilous test dives in Stuka bombers, work so dangerous because of the G-forces that she would experience, she frequently lost consciousness while diving. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. She secured a rare reclassification as equal to Aryan. Just from how important her work was, they decided to reclassify her race as not Aryan, but equal to it, granting her family a bubble of immunity from the Holocaust, which was provided by Joseph Goebbels.
I wonder what they would have labeled me as.
Who knows?
I think I do.
Do you want to share?
No, keep going.
Okay. So, some more context on how
I know that guy.
Everything that we've discussed so far. I guess I should provide some context on Hitler himself.
Is that Stalin behind him?
No.
Oh, I'm tripping. Doesn't that look like him though?
No.
I think I'm confused who Stalin is.
Yeah, actually, I can see the resemblance. Yeah. Maybe.
I feel like they all just had those mustaches.
Well, yeah. I mean, don't forget, Stalin was a male model.
Yeah. Peep the nerd in the side, too, with the glasses.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Yeah, so this is going to be just... So in 1913, Hitler moved to Munich, and after the First World War broke out, in 1914, he joined the German army. He was placed in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. That wasn't even the German words that got me. And served as a runner, taking messages to and from the front line. Hitler was injured twice in the war, and while he was in a hospital recovering from his second injury, an armistice was declared and the war was over. After the war, Hitler returned to Munich. He continued working for the army as an instruction officer in the information department. His job was to encourage nationalism and anti-communism while infiltrating small political parties. It was through this job that Hitler first attended a meeting of the German Workers' Party. This was on September 12th, 1919. Hitler entered into a discussion with the main speaker at the event, and the speaker, who was impressed with Hitler's points and oratory skills, invited him to join the party. Hitler joined the party and then the committee of the German Workers' Party. He was very unimpressed because they weren't organized enough, so he set about transforming the group, where he became responsible for recruitment, propaganda, and organizing larger meetings. He began to give speeches at these meetings, and his oratory skills became indispensable to the party. By the 24th of February, 1920, so less than 6 months after he joined the party, Hitler announced their new 25-point program for the Nazi Party. After this announcement, Hitler began to overhaul the entire structure of the party, replacing their Democratic Committee with himself. The proposal was rejected. After another disagreement about merging with another party, Hitler resigned. He stated he would only return if he was made party chairman with sole powers. And the party agreed.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, well, the big thing with that was the loss of their main speaker would just kill the party. They had finally started to get some traction, some motion on socials and all, and then they lost out on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they gave sole party chairmanship to Adolf Hitler. And on the 8th of November, 1923, he tried to pull off a military coup, and overthrow the Weimar Republic. This is what's commonly known as the Beer Hall Putsch. I can't say that word right, but I'm trying.
Beer Hall Putsch?
Yeah, P-U-T-S-C-H.
Oh, porch.
Stay in school. Throughout 1923, the economic and political crisis struck. The Nazi Party and other nationalists believed that an armed takeover of Bavaria would overthrow the Weimar Republic. Hitler and the Nazi Party collaborated with others from the army, who, as I said earlier, the army kind of operated co-independently from the weak politicians in the Republic. So some, like General Ludendorff, put together a plan to attempt a military coup. And the plan was set, weapons and transport were gathered, and they were waiting for a signal from Bavarian Parliament to march to Berlin and seize power. And on that day in 1923, everyone in the plan began to have second thoughts after hearing that the army that was in Berlin would resist them. And so Hitler decided that the plan should go ahead even if no one else did, where he marched into a beer hall in Munich and declared his intention to take over the government and started a national revolution. Von Kahr, who was giving a speech in the hall that Hitler marched into, gave his support to Hitler at gunpoint. However, Hitler left to sort out a disagreement between his personal group, like the SA is what they were called, and they were also known as the Brown Shirts, and official German troops. And Von Kahr withdrew his support, moved the Bavarian government, and declared the Nazi Party a banned organization. So essentially the way it went down is Hitler marched into a room where Von Kahr was giving a speech, pointed a gun at him and said, "Do you support my party?" And Von Kahr said yes. Hitler said, "Good." Left to sort out a disagreement, and Von Kahr left and then said, "That party, they're banned." So it was very poorly planned on Hitler's part. And the following morning, Hitler led a demonstration through the streets of Munich planning on taking control of the war ministry, and armed police blocked their route. Violence broke out, and 14 Nazis were killed. Hitler fled the scene but was arrested 2 days later and put on trial for treason. His trial took place from the 26th of February to the 1st of April in 1924. He was found guilty of treason but had a sympathetic judge, so he was only given 5 years in prison. And of the 5 years, he only served 9 months.
Crazy.
Yeah. He received favorable treatment, mostly because the judges supported him, and he was given private rooms, gifts, and frequent visitors. And this was during during this incarceration, he first wrote Mein Kampf, which he actually dictated to 2 of his fellow inmates. He was granted parole and released on December 20th, 1924. Upon release, Hitler decided to switch his strategy. He's not going to go and hold officials at gunpoint and have them try to side with him, because he realized most people don't like you, even if they would have agreed with you, when you pull a gun on them.
That's true.
So his new strategy was adopting a path of legality, taking power through elections rather than violent revolution. And he restructured the Nazi Party into a national organization and created subgroups like the Hitler Youth to try to promote young people into joining his organization and influencing their parents for his organization. During Germany's golden era of stability, at least compared to what had previously happened from 1924 to 1929, most of the extremist parties struggled. In the 1928 Reichstag elections, the Nazis won only 2.6% of the vote. And then the stock market crashed in the US. And the Wall Street crash in 1929 devastated the German economy, which was already struggling. High unemployment, failures of the banks fueled support for the Nazis, who promised that they could bring order and prosperity by removing the old government. The party's vote share surged in 1930. Only 2 years after the election, they only got 2.6% of the vote, and they received 18.3% of the vote. Now they were officially a major political force. And in the next election, in 1932, Hitler ran for president against Paul von Hindenburg. He lost with 36.8% of the vote, but the campaign essentially guaranteed his place as a credible national leader, someone that was on the public stage and received the second most votes of anyone. By the July Reichstag election in 1932, or essentially the half-year election, the Nazi Party became the largest group in parliament with 37.3% of the votes. They had a slight dip in the November election that year, but they still remained the largest party, setting the stage for Hitler to be appointed as chancellor going into January of 1933.
You know he was a drug addict, right?
Oh yeah. He did some crazy drugs too. I think meth eye drops, cocaine eye drops were involved as well.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
I did not know that was a thing. That's kind of scary.
That would hurt.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, there's a video of him at the Olympics. He's like, bro, like cracked out of his mind.
Well, that was because he saw Jesse Owens just cooking his people.
Yeah.
He had been preaching for like 20 years by that point that like Aryans were the best, and then he just sees Jesse Owens just run like a 4.40 and just torch everyone.
About, yeah. I didn't know who Jesse Owens was. I was just like, yeah.
Oh yeah, so Jesse
Is that the
Owens,
first black man to run?
I don't think he was the first one ever to run. No. But Jesse Owens was an African American who competed in the 1930s and won a gold medal at the Olympics in Berlin.
Oh, sweet.
For anyone who isn't familiar with Jesse Owens.
Jesse Brown.
Yeah. And it was considered a massive blow to the Nazi pride to lose in Berlin with Hitler watching. But anyway, after Hitler became chancellor in 1933, he transitioned from the leading political faction to a totalitarian regime through a combination of legal maneuvering, political intrigue, and systematic violence. So the photo I have here is of a Nazi book burning, which Nazi photos are so surreal, like to look at. Like, it's like creepy to look at, right? Like that was a group that was the majority in a country by this point.
Imagine being there.
Yeah.
Just like imagine being the one taking that photo.
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't have thought nothing crazy about it because they would have agreed with them.
But like if we could go back then and then we were there, we'd be like, take me home.
But I feel like that's like a lot of political rallies look like that kind of.
I feel like they're a little less scary, but I don't know.
Oh yeah, well the fire definitely adds ambiance.
Yeah, just a little.
But why are they burning books?
So book burnings was a common thing for the Nazis, just to remove bad ideas. They were on a disinformation campaign to remove any idea that opposed Nazi philosophy. They even opposed certain science depending on its source, citing things like Jewish science and declaiming like the works of Albert Einstein and other scientists at the time. He was a Jew? Yeah, Albert Einstein was Jewish, but he was also German. And so a lot of his work was rejected as Jewish nonsense, essentially, even though it had been experimentally proven in 1927, I believe. At least his work on general relativity was proven by then. So
like time travel and stuff.
No. Reichstag fire in February 27 was the fire that destroyed the German parliament building. The Nazis blamed the communists sabotaging them and used the event to incite a lot of public fear, which let them issue more decrees and further move into totalitarianism. And on Hitler's urging, President Hindenburg signed an emergency decree which indefinitely suspended any civil liberty, like freedom of speech, press, and assembly, in response to the fire. Conducted in an atmosphere of state-sponsored terror and intimidation, the Nazi Party won 43.9% of the vote. This was not a standalone majority, but it was a massive majority because there's more than two parties in Germany. And they achieved control through a coalition with the German National People's Party. In March 23rd, they ended up signing the Enabling Act, which was a law that was originally titled The Law to Remedy the Distress of the People in the Reich, and it gave Hitler the power to enact laws without the consent of Parliament or the President. So that was the Enabling Act. Essentially ended the democratic approach in Germany. And then by March of 1933, the end of March of 1933, the Dachau establishment became the first state-run concentration camp, and it was used to house political opponents, primarily communists and social democrats. By April 7th, so this is all moving very quickly, because remember 1933 January is when he became chancellor, and by April, the law for the restoration of professional civil service allowed the government to dismiss non-Aryan and politically unreliable civil servants. So essentially anyone who, whether they were Jew or Gypsy or any group that was considered non-Aryan who worked in civil service could be dismissed at will, without cause. Synchronization then brought all aspects of German life into line with Nazi ideology. This was in May of 1933, and it began by dissolving all independent trade unions. So essentially, within 6 months of taking over, Hitler had taken the president and parliament ability to deny him the ability to make laws. They had taken it away. The trade unions could no longer exist. Any civil servant who was non-Aryan could be dismissed at will, and any political opponent he had could be locked into a concentration camp. And that was only 6 months after being appointed to the second most powerful position in Germany. And the final steps were completed for the Nazi Party taking over on July 14th of 1933, when the Nazi Party was declared the only legal political party in all of Germany. Anyone who was associated with a different party was now a criminal. And in August of 1934, so the next year, President Hindenburg, who had been in poor health this whole time, passed away. And Hitler merged the office of Chancellor and President, took on the title of Führer, and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, becoming the sole leader in Germany. So it took about a year and 8 months from when he was appointed Chancellor to becoming sole leader of all aspects of Germany and leader of the only political party in all of Germany.
He must have been a great talker to convince people to follow his ideas and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, an amazing speaker. You can hear like speeches of his.
I don't think I would understand it, but
no, just like the intonation and the ability to draw in a crowd. Like,
yeah.
Didn't he lie though a lot about like what he said he was gonna do and all this
Kim
stuff?
Jong-un.
What?
That's King of Kim Jong-un.
But I heard that he lied a lot about like what he was gonna do for everybody, and then when he actually really was full in power, he was like, "Oh, I completely lied about everything."
Yeah, he lied a lot in general. The big lies are something I was questioning whether getting into on the show, but I ultimately decided not to go too deep into, just because I was like, oh man, you can really open up a can of worms, which is with the war.
Yeah.
He pulled the president prime minister Chamberlain like on his like around his finger. Like, he had the prime minister of Great Britain just completely stumped. The big ones I can think of is Chamberlain would constantly get promised that Hitler was going to stop invading countries. And he would be like, all right, well, now we've recaptured our land from before. We're all done. We're not going to do this again. And then he'd invade another country. And then he'd be like, no, this is actually, there's a real reason. And we won't move anywhere past Poland. We just really need Poland because there was all our factories that were there that the French took, destroyed. And then he'd invade. And when they finally invaded France, and this was like, I'll probably get more into this. Maybe I might not mention this later. But one crazy thing that happened was when France surrendered, which was very quickly after being invaded, he had them sign their surrender papers in the train car where Germany had signed the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. So he was petty too.
Wow.
So the spot where he thought Germany had suffered their greatest humiliation when they lost World War I and had to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which essentially said that Germany was fully responsible, had to pay all those countries, couldn't have a military, like made Germany the weakest country in that area. And after they were the strongest country in Europe and potentially the world, early in World War II, he had France in the same train car.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, but this is the reason I didn't want to get too much into what was going on with this is that could be its whole own thing.
Yeah.
So I was trying to more give background on this is all that's happening. So Germany throughout this whole period is rising back to relevancy though.
Yeah.
Hitler violated the Treaty of Versailles very often and quickly. One of the big ones was he began immediately raising a standing army. They were only supposed to have 100,000 people. Within, I think it was a year and a half of his election or ascendancy, they had over 1 million people in their standing army. So he immediately began pumping out industry, building tanks, naval ships, and refortifying the German economy and military once it was all under his control.
I heard they had some pretty good weapons.
They had many good weapons, especially in aviation in the Luftwaffe. And part of that was Melitta von Stauffenberg, who comes up in a second here. She was very important in developing and testing a lot of their aviation technology. But back to Klaus.
That's not her.
That is not her. That is Claus von Stauffenberg. So remember, he just got married. He's in the German army. He's rapidly rising through the ranks as a brilliant tactician. And his relationship with the German army between 1933 and 1939 began to change as his direct experience of war increased. So again, he was raised in a Catholic aristocratic family. So he was educated to see military service as a moral duty, tied to like discipline, hierarchy, service to the state. More so he saw it more as that than he did as like a political movement. So he wasn't going into it saying I'm a Nazi. He was saying I'm doing this for the good of Germany. Yeah. And this was an important thing that played on his emotions given what he later wound up doing. Don't forget also he had the exposure to the Stephen George circle, which again reinforced ideals of cultural renewal, inner discipline, leadership by like cultivation of the mind rather than emotional fervor. Whereas the Nazi Party used like big groups of people and a lot of, channeled emotion to try to gain power. So after joining the Reichswehr, or the German army, in 1926, he continued his career as the military began to rapidly expand under Hitler's command. The early years of Hitler's rule coincided with rearmament of Germany, repudiation of the Treaty of Versailles, and restoration of conscription in 1935, which is just a draft. Like many professional officers, Stauffenberg viewed these developments positively. He saw the expansion of the army as offering professional opportunity, as well as restoring Germany's sovereignty and international standing. His early support for what he perceived as national revival was pragmatic and institutional, not ideological. So he did not actually join the Nazi Party, and his loyalty remained directed toward the army as a traditional, apolitical institution. Stauffenberg served primarily in staff and cavalry roles during this period, developing a reputation as an intelligent and capable officer. He was involved in planning and organizational work. He was not yet in frontline command, so he was exposed early on to operational decision-making and like mechanized modern warfare, which ultimately helped with his, reputation as a brilliant leader, because he was much less about grunt work and more into the most important aspects of battle, which is organization. It's often said, and it's very, very true, that the most important part of successfully winning wars is essentially how you get your supply lines run. It's not and Stauffenberg learned that very, very well. He was on the staff of the 10th Army during the invasion of Poland in September of 1939. That campaign was the beginning of Germany's war of expansion. They had previously annexed several regions, but those were welcomed with open arms. Like when Austria was annexed into Germany, it was an open arms type of welcoming, but Poland was an actual war. The Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War, where Germany took over Poland in only a few days, was the first campaign that Stauffenberg was involved in, and it was perfectly militarily successful. It was accompanied, though, by famously widespread atrocities committed by the SS units and regular army formations. During that Polish campaign, Stauffenberg's disillusionment accelerated. He became aware of mass executions of civilians and prisoners, persecution of Jews, and the deliberate destruction of Polish society as a part of broader ecological objectives.
Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry about the delay. It was during the Polish campaign that Stauffenberg's disillusionment accelerated. He became aware of mass executions of civilians and prisoners, the mass persecution of Jews, and the deliberate destruction of Polish society as part of broader ideological objectives. These actions conflicted sharply with his understanding of military honor and the law of war. Both concepts were rooted from his aristocratic upbringing and in the professional ethics of pre-Nazi officer corps. The war he observed was not merely a conventional conflict between states, but a racial and ideological war that subordinated military necessity to brutality. What all that very poetic language means is he saw that the Nazi army was much more of a brutish horde that was designed to eradicate Polish society and culture than it was a well-disciplined fighting machine to win territory from another state. And that isn't to say that the Nazi army was ill-disciplined. They were a hyper-disciplined and effective military force. It was more just in how they treated civilians. They didn't have the code of ethos that he himself grew up with as part of his internal discipline that the Stephen George poetic society really followed, the inner circle.
Yeah.
Also, the structure of the German military was changing in ways around that time that troubled him. In 1934, Hitler required everyone in the military to swear a personal oath to him, which eradicated the independence the army had in serving Germany and moved that to serving Hitler.
I feel like that's just like weird. Like,
yeah, so the closest like modern U.S. comp for the majority of our audience who is in the U.S. is that the U.S. military swears to uphold the Constitution, and the German military would have done something similar for the good of the fatherland, Germany. And in the U.S., the change would be that you would no longer swear to the Constitution, which, upholds freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of assembly and right to bear arms and all of that.
I like that one.
Personal freedom as a whole. But it would be instead swearing fealty to the leader of the country.
So like Donald Trump.
Yeah, in 2026 now.
That's crazy.
It's January 2026. Yeah, they would be swearing to the president of the United States. And that's like, that immediately takes the military as an overall, we support causes to we support a person.
Yeah, I feel like that's a bit obsessive though. Like,
I think
that he made them do that. Like he wanted everyone to be obsessed and follow exactly what he said, which I mean, I guess is kind of the whole point of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just nuts.
Yeah, and that's actually like pretty common across a lot of like cults of personality.
Yeah, very cultish.
Yeah, like if you think about it, like Charles Manson, he would have his people swear loyalty to him and all of that, and he had a cult of personality.
That sounds familiar. Who is it?
Charles Manson was responsible for the hippie murders of Sharon Tate.
That's not the one where he made him drink all that stuff. And they all
no, that's
died.
Jim Jones.
Oh, okay.
Jim Jones made him drink the poisoned Kool-Aid in Jonestown. No, Charles Manson was in the late 60s and early 70s a cult leader. Actually, it might have ended in 69. Maybe it went to 70, but he led a cult called The People. And the family, and Manson's family.
That sounds so familiar.
He would rename everyone. That like they would get a family name when they joined. There was a lot of young people. It attracted a lot of people in the hippie movement.
So creepy.
Helter Skelter was something he talked about. They wrote it on the walls after a murder. He was obsessed with rock music, particularly the Beatles. Though he made his own music. But the reason I brought him up is like he made people swear loyalty to him over anyone else.
Similar vibe.
Yeah, so it was just on a much smaller scale. So you can imagine if he became the leader of a country.
Yeah.
That's potentially very similar to what Hitler was. And like Hitler, he was also very persuasive when he talked to people, but raving out of his mind and on drugs, especially near the end.
Even worse.
Yeah. But by the end of 1939, Stauffenberg began to recognize that the army that he had been very pro its redevelopment was no longer a stabilizing force capable of restraining Germany from going outside the bounds of interdiscipline and morality, but instead an instrument to commit atrocities in the name of the Fuhrer. And this realization marked the transition he had from cautious acceptance of the regime's early successes. Because again, they went from the world that Klaus grew up in was World War I. And then following World War I, his family moved closer to inner Germany because, again, they had supported the Kaiser, and his father had been very important in the Kaiser's staff. They were wealthy enough that it didn't hit them as hard as it hit other people, but he saw the country that he had a lot of national pride in, who his family had served, generations and generations back, as like fought Napoleon and all of that. He saw that country in just a state of bankruptcy, and their military was weak internationally. And as Hitler came on, he had a lot of early success. He stabilized the economy, he brought industry back, he strengthened the military. But now, and that was something that, despite Klaus's dislike of how Hitler approached it from the emotional fervor type thing, he still had to be pleasantly surprised, I'd assume, with how well everything seemed to be going, to now moral and professional opposition to the war itself and how the Nazis conducted the war. I was going to put, but I didn't want to in case, because I knew it would be a photo that you guys would be seeing for a very long time. There was going to be photos from where Klaus's unit was stationed, and there were lines of people hung that they would attach signs to, whether they were Polish citizens. Most of them weren't soldiers at all that they were hanging. It was random citizens for very I guess, just the reasons were mostly off of racial bias.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But Melitta Schiller, because again, she wasn't married yet to Klaus's brother, her career in the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, developed at the intersection of technical brilliance, personal vulnerability, and political contradiction. So she was already trained as an engineer and mathematician, and she earned her doctorate in aeronautical engineering in the early 1930s and distinguished herself in the highly specialized field of flight testing. In 1937, she was recruited into the Luftwaffe's test program, where her analytical skill and exceptional flying ability made her invaluable. She became very associated with the testing of dive bombers, most notably the Ju-87 Stuka, flying repeated high-stress dive tests to evaluate airframe limits, control response, and structural fatigue. These flights were extraordinarily dangerous, involving steep dives and pull-outs that pushed aircraft and pilots to their limits. And Melitta carried out hundreds of them before the war even started, earning a reputation as Germany's most reliable and precise test pilot. Her professional status, though, was in constant tension with her legal and racial status, because while she was highly honored, she was potentially going to be highly honored. She was nominated for several awards, but she never received them because she had her partial Jewish ancestry, which under the Nuremberg laws should have barred her from service in armed forces. That law, as talked about earlier, any non-Aryan person could be dismissed. But her continued employment was made possible largely through personal intervention by Hermann Göring, who recognized her unique value to the Luftwaffe's aircraft development system. Göring issued exemptions that allowed her to remain in service, a protection that was both a privilege and a trap. Göring's intervention insulated her from immediate persecution, but it also bound her more and more tightly to a regime that was going to potentially revoke that protection at any time. Essentially, she was only allowed to stay in her current position because she was contributing to the Nazi war effort so valuably. However, if the Nazis won the war, they would no longer have any reason to keep her protected. So she was riding a fine line of needing to stay valuable enough that they couldn't get rid of her without becoming so valuable that they gained total air superiority. Her position showed that the Nazis were very much willing to bend their own ideology if they needed to. And that's, again, one of the issues. Well, in this case, it was good because their ideology is bad, but just in general, with attaching everything to a person instead of an ideology, because the people's can change quickly. So, like, it's not an 100% ideology. It's whatever the leaders of the regime thought was most important. So in 1937, the same year she entered service in the German Air Force, Melitta married Alexander Graf von Stauffenberg, Klaus's older brother and twin of Berthold. Their marriage brought her into the von Stauffenberg circle at a moment when the family's military connections and internal debates about Germany's future were intensifying. So this union was essentially Jewish pilot who had been accepted into the Luftwaffe despite her heritage and was now riding a very fine line between being, exterminated potentially, depending on whether Göring withdrew protection, or, and on the other side was one of the three brothers in a family who was dedicated to Germany's success, but was growing increasingly alienated from Nazi ideals because their own personal morality told them to resist the Nazi ideals. So it was a pretty interesting union to have, and it is probably one of the few times that she might have interacted with Claus, because he was in the Air Force and off on the fronts in the war, and she was back in Germany flying test flights. Claus was aware of her work and her precarious status, but their relationship, like whether they knew each other well, isn't really known. Melitta, for her part, was not involved in any resistance activity during these years, but she was increasingly conscious of the contradictions of serving a state that regarded her as racially suspect. Throughout her time in the Luftwaffe, Melitta remained focused on technical excellence rather than politics. She did not publicly oppose the regime, but she also didn't embrace its ideology. Her daily reality had to be calculated risk. Saying or doing the wrong thing could result in Göring withdrawing his protection from her, which could result in her family, which I'll get into why family is connected so tightly with that later, being sent to a concentration camp. And her balance became much, much tighter to navigate following July 1944, which is kind of the climax of our story today. So back to more of what's happening in Germany at this time. This was Germany's rapid expansion during the war. This was between 1939 and 1941. The rapid expansion of the war transformed both the scale of Germany's ambitions and the roles that Claus and Melitta had to play within the military system. The war opened with the invasion of Poland in September 1939, a campaign designed to demonstrate the effectiveness of Germany's newly rebuilt armed forces. Militarily, the operation relied on coordinated attacks by armored divisions, infantry, and close air support, which produced rapid advances that overwhelmed Polish defenses. Politically and morally, the campaign marked a decisive break from conventional warfare. The invasion was accompanied by systematic violence against civilians, the targeting of Polish elites, and the beginning of mass persecution. For Claus von Stauffenberg, serving as a staff officer with the 10th Army, Poland was a formative experience. He was not directly involved in frontline combat yet, but his position exposed him to reports and realities of occupation policy, which, for Nazi Germany, occupation policy meant brutality. The campaign intensified his doubts about the nature of the war Germany was fighting. In contrast, the campaign reinforced Melitta von Stauffenberg's importance to the Luftwaffe. Air operations continued to expand, and the need for more reliable dive bombers and improved aircraft performance grew, especially as other air forces became involved in the war, more technically advanced ones specifically. Melitta's work as a test pilot became increasingly critical. She flew repeated evaluation missions to refine dive angles, braking systems, and structural tolerances on new planes. Her flights contributed directly to the effectiveness of close air support during the Polish campaign and subsequent operations. The defeat of France in May and June of 1940 further elevated Germany's confidence and their international standing. The rapid collapse of one of Europe's believed to be major military powers reinforced the belief among many officers that German operational doctrine and leadership were just superior to anything else in Europe at the time. For Claus, who was now moving quickly through senior staff roles, largely due to his brilliance, the victory was professionally validating, but morally ambiguous. And this is it's very tough to imagine being in his position, but he's just, as established early, an exceptional mind in general. He was accomplished at basically everything he did. Yeah. He potentially could have joined the Olympic trials, even though he started out as a very sickly child. He was an accomplished cellist. He was an amazing artist. He was part of poet societies and literary groups. He could draw plans. He wanted to potentially be an architect. And he was also just a brilliant military mind. So he wanted to do the best he could in everything. But every time Germany won the war, or won a conflict in the war, he saw the atrocities they committed and felt bad about that. So, it's just such a complicated position, because he didn't want to self-sabotage the country he grew up loving, but he increasingly saw that country move away from what he loved about it to begin with. Yeah, the success of the campaign did not erase his concerns about the Nazi Party, but they actually delayed his opposition, because it created the impression that German leadership, which, however flawed it was morally, was still successful and delivered stability and victory to Germany. For Melitta, the campaign intensified her workload as her aircraft performance data from France, which was the newest campaign the Nazis had blazed through in Blitzkrieg, fed directly into ongoing testing and modification programs. Her work shifted from experimental development toward optimizing existing designs for sustained combat use. Then Operation Barbarossa began in June of 1941 and marked a fundamental escalation. The invasion of the Soviet Union was not conceived as a limited military campaign, but as a war of annihilation. The scale of the operation demanded unprecedented coordination across the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, which were the German Army and Air Force. Klaus's role increasingly placed him within a system that was now openly complicit in mass violence, including mass starvation of civilian populations. By this point, his earlier disillusionment hardened into recognition that the war itself was criminal in nature, and the continued military success only deepened Germans' moral complicity. For Melitta, Barbarossa meant further expansion of her responsibilities and risks, because now that they were invading Russia, aircrafts had to be pushed to their limits in the cold. I don't want to get into this just because we are going to go way over time if we do. The Russian campaign was cold. Every day people would go to sleep and just parts of the army wouldn't wake back up. And vehicles would just get left behind because the fuel just froze inside them. It was unbelievably cold during that war, or that section of the war. The Luftwaffe's reliance on proven designs placed greater pressure on test pilots to extract maximum performance in poor conditions, and she flew relentlessly under complete and extreme physical strain while remaining legally vulnerable to any persecution should Göring ever decide that she wasn't useful enough to keep around. The war expanded continually eastward, and the fight between Russia and Germany became among the most brutal fronts in military history. Both Klaus and Melitta found themselves stuck in a system that they now completely disagreed with. The war didn't continue to go the Nazis' way as they became increasingly involved in a two-front war. The period from 1942 to 1943 marked the decisive turning point of the war, not only militarily, but also psychologically and morally, both for Germany as a state and for Klaus and Melitta as individuals embedded within it. The illusion of inevitable victory, sustained by the rapid successes of 1939 to 1941 and most of the European continent falling under their control rapidly, collapsed under the weight of the overreach and two-fronted campaign that the Nazis became stuck behind, as well as catastrophic leadership decisions. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Misfit History. This was part 1 of the von Stauffenberg story. Part 2 will be released next Wednesday, January 28th.